All right. Welcome, folks. Welcome to the this January episode of the Ujamaa Hour, our first episode of 2021. So we're here in 2021. It's already been an astounding sort of year, but we are thriving and moving forward. There are certainly lots of good things happening within the Coconut Collaborative as well as within Co-op for Lib. We look forward to kind of sharing some of those things with you as we move forward, with the broadcast. I'm Michael Strode. I am the coordinator of the Coconut Collaborative, Chicago's only time-based service and skills exchange, otherwise known as a time bank. I am here on the Ujamaa Hour for the purpose of having these intimate and informal exchanges around the Black social and solidarity economy. We are looking and angling, we are eyeing towards a different type of economy, a different economic system, a different economic structure. And some of the conversations I've had, some of the projects that I've covered on the broadcast do just that. The goal is really to map out, what are the values, what are the structures, what are the sort of entanglements and the relationships, what are the elements of this new economic system that we might be angling towards if we were to look at what these projects are working on, what type of participation these projects value, what type of relationships people build within these spaces. We had an astounding year last year, just being able to talk, in December with Alita Torre. We had an opportunity. Actually, we don't want to skip over our special edition episodes. So back there at the end of December, we did those special edition episodes in honor of Kwanzaa, and we had the wonderful opportunity to speak with Miliaku Nbweze of Twice as Good in Cooperation. We talked to Deidre Somerville and Yavit Holtz, really talking about the elements of Isusu and rotating credit associations. They're rotating savings and credit associations. And then we talk with Maida McNeil, Honeypot Performance, and Fifth City Project, just really digging in, or Fifth City Revisited, really digging into some of the elements of their work and how they connect those things to the principles of Kwanzaa. And again, really just plugging back on this notion that, Ujamaa as a concept, while it is framed as cooperative economics, is really about familyhood, is really about relationships, and the center and the core of that economic definition that is grounded in the community economics notion is really about how how these systems of production, exchange, consumption, how do they connect people together with one another, and how do they ground people and root people in the places where they live. So that is certainly what an economy is, and if that is what an economy is, then we are experts in the economies where we live. We are experts in the relationships that we cultivate with one another, and we are experts in understanding and analyzing the places where we live. So we know what those places need. We know what the people in those places need, and the opportunity for us in terms of thinking about what an economy is for and what we can be doing to participate more deeply in that economy is really just, deepening our understanding of those needs, getting into what those relationships are, and bringing our experience to the table, and then telling those folks who are now planning our economy that we are the experts in our experience. All of that stated, we have a great guest here tonight. I'll be introducing them in a moment, but you certainly saw the preview on our post. If you're glancing at this on Facebook, or if you caught the link on Instagram, we've got Erika Allen here of Urban Growers Collective, as well as Green Era, and we'll be talking more richly about those projects in just a moment. But before we go there, we always like to do our recap, and I like to tell you what I'm working on, and just kind of give you a lens into some of that work. And some of the things that have happened recently. So yesterday, on Sunday, we've had our Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, our most recent Sunday meeting. So you know that we meet alternating Sundays from 3 to 6 over Zoom. And really, we're digging into the history of worker cooperatives in Black communities and in Black movement organizations in the Black radical tradition, and we're grounding ourselves in that tradition and in that history in order that we can think about what the future looks like, for that work, how it looks like to practice that work in the contemporary space, and to build worker cooperatives in communities now that really give people control over their labor, and ultimately control over their lives. This is the sort of terrain that we fight upon. Offering liberatory work experiences, because ultimately we want all the dimensions of people's lives to be planned and have democratic participation by them in the shape of those experiences. So Co-op for Lib has recently just completed our collective study and reading of Freedom Farmers by Monica M. White, Agricultural Resistance in the Black Freedom Movement. So that was a rich period of study around freedom farmers. We had an opportunity to really talk thoroughly about some of the work that's happened within the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, and of course Malik Yakini, speaking very deeply there, and Monica being very connected to that work. We took it back, of course, on that chapter with Fannie Lou Hamer and the Freedom Farms Cooperative. We talked about the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and what that history speaks towards us. And then, of course, there is the sort of the nexus, the intersection of the intersection of Black agricultural thought, that is George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, and W.B. Du Bois, or Black agricultural and cooperative thought. That is those three figures. And then one of the critiques, certainly of the text that we picked up in the harvest was really just, there was an opportunity to really angle in on the experience and notions of women and femmes in that space. And certainly, that's a historical absence. But we don't have to continue that as a present, as a sort of present absence. We can write new histories, right? And we are writing new histories in this space. And certainly Erika Allen will be able to speak to some of that. So yes, one of the things that we're working on in the completion of that read is that we're going to be doing an illustrated guide or a comic that kind of draws out some of these ideas of collective agency and community resilience that Monica M. White highlights in Freedom Farmers. And so, if you're interested in being involved in that, come check us out, on that second Sunday. We'll be back again and on the next date, which is, because I can't remember my dates, January 24th. There we go. It's so glad that I have my calendar right on the side of me. So we'll be back on January 24th to really dig into that material again. And so if you want to be a part of that 3 to 6 p.m., check it out on Facebook, Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group. You can be part of the material in terms of developing the comic, even if you weren't part of the collective study period. And then after we complete this project around the guide and the forum, around this text, we'll begin another text. So we'll have another period of collective study, which culminates in another period of work. You can join us on the mutual aid developments that we're working on. And yeah, you can be a part of that, continual analysis, building our skill, building our practice in connection and relationship with other folks. Also on Saturday, I had an opportunity to participate in the Solidarity Economy 101 with the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, Highlander. And so that was a fantastic event. The Solidarity Economy 101 was an opportunity for folks who are not familiar with the solidarity economy to really come into space and be inside of an interactive and participatory session, workshop that really, guided us through sort of these notions of what the solidarity economy looks like in practice. And I had an opportunity to offer some context from the Chicago lens, really talking about that intersection and that interaction between the Dill Pickle, between the Brave Space Alliance, providing mutual aid, the Dill Pickle providing the food cooperative angle, Chicago Community Loan Fund providing funding. So all of this sort of ecosystem of all of these things interacting together, which really creates a lens towards a solidarity economy in practice, and not just sort of a theoretical construct, but how these things interact together. And it's not like these things aren't interacting in struggle. We are all struggling. We do not all agree. There is, another dust up with sort of, challenges in terms of there's another negotiation with the union at the Dill Pickle, and sort of that's all I'll say about that, because an element of that is public. But that is an example of the struggle that is required, when we are talking about participatory democracies in different spaces. There are layers of ownership there. There are layers of relationship there, and we are wrestling with all of those things, wrestling to live out our values in these spaces, and that's ultimately what the solidarity economy is about in practice. And so I hope that that's what folks got from that Saturday session. We'll be doing another one on January 30th, so look on the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network page for that. But I really hope that's what folks drew down from the session, and I really look forward to another opportunity to dig in, and really be in struggle and engage in these ideas and in this practice with folks around them. So all of that stated, I will have a closing thought on mad mapping, so I'll save that for the end. So just put a push pin in that concept of mad mapping, because that probably will relate to our discussion around healing with Erika Allen this evening. But all of that stated, we are at that point, where I want to make sure that we go ahead and dig into this interview. We've got Erika Allen on the line, co-founder and operations director of co-founder, CEO, and operations director of Urban Growers Collective, president of Green Era Educational NFP, and co-owner of Green Era Sustainability Partners. Erika Allen, was director of Growing Power Chicago for 15 years prior to that closing. So we're going to, dig into some of that history. We're going to talk about the relationship between visual arts and creativity, as well as the sort of agricultural angle. We're going to talk about some elements of healing, and we will really, dig into the history and the backstory that creates the body of work that she represents right now. So all of that said, I want to go ahead and welcome Erika to the interview. Welcome to the Ujamaa Hour, Erika. Oh, you muted yourself, so you have to unmute there.
I said I will repeat myself again, gratefully. Just thank you so much for the invitation and being able to share some of our story tonight. So I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. Likewise. So what I really like to do, I value this concept of mythology, and I value personal myth making. So, there is the story that other folks have told about your story, and then there's the way that you narrate your story. So why don't you just maybe give us your version of sort of your history and how it, lines up or leads up to the work that you're doing now?
So it's an interesting way to frame the invitation to share my story, because I'm actually, as a cultural person, don't really believe in myths. I believe in variations of narratives told from different perspectives, and I think that that mindset and an understanding of a faceted approach is very much the story of my family and our community of practice over many generations. And for me, having the childhood that I had, being born when I was born, where I was born, and having a pretty epic childhood in terms of transatlantic travel, never thinking about it as something that left an impression on my understanding of the world and my place in the world. But I do think that definitely created an impression around what was possible. And then growing up in a really kind of like, after having this sort of, unusual childhood, growing up very much like it could have been 100 years ago on a farm with no off-farm labor, which I always tell people, like, I grew up farming, farming vegetables without any labor other than our family. And our family really used that to go to school, to pay our bills, with both of, my mom and dad both working full-time non-farm jobs. Then my dad had the opportunity to retire / a settlement. And he was inspired. He had a passion and a calling to really farm. It was what he always wanted to do, even though we had been farming, but it was always kind of a side thing. And then his dream kind of got shifted from, just his own business, farming, and, having a greenhouse and wanting to, do what he had been kind of doing just as a way to supplement our family's income. And it's so quick. There's such a need for food and for youth engagement that he got kind of pulled into the not-for-profit work. And right around the same time that I had finished kind of my 20s journeys of like trying to figure out what I wanted to do after art school, spending a lot of time going out to South Dakota and really learning and being part of a family and learning those spiritual traditions. I'm part of my lineage is Chickasaw, but those are the teachers that came, Lakota, and spent a lot of time out there and just learning about the food system from the perspective of what does it look like in a rural environment with indigenous folks who there's lots of land, no one's growing any food. And it was just kind of an interesting experience for me, seeing that and making the correlation between the communities I was working with at the time with art, not with food, but as an artist, and my journey as an artist, being connected to my spirituality and that journey, but also connected to trying to just understand the world, understand why are things like this in this Chicago place, with a bizarre kind of combination of experiences to sort of cross-reference and to understand, which is, what everyone does. But I was really intrigued as an artist to explore social justice, and if the terminology continues to evolve and this, that, and the other. But just to understand why I couldn't travel south of Adams. That was something I was told in 1987 in my first, orientation at an art school, is that it was dangerous. So, here I am as a Black person, as a multicultural Black person, being told you can't go south, and for no other reason other than there's a lot of Black people who live south. So I was just like, how is this just normal? This is not right. But it was a calling for me because it was like, well, I got to see what's south, sort of like one of those, don't cross this line. Well, you can't explain to me why I can't cross the line. I'm gonna cross the line. And so that began my long career of crossing the line and asking questions that are kind of obvious, but I guess a lot of people don't like to ask them, but I just ask questions like, well, we got all this land all over the place. Why are we growing food? And asking those questions, I would not have done without having that exploration and to going in my 20s to South Dakota, having those like making those connections as to rural and urban, not being really about sophistication or this, that, and the other, but really about spatial relationships and how people are either connected or disconnected from the land and density. But it's the same issues I was seeing, at that time at Robert Taylor homes when they were still standing, because I'm that old, and seeing that world, going into that world, and not seeing anything green other than God's gang, who was there doing amazing work, and really resisting that demolition because that was culture and that was home for generations of people. And seeing and hearing and being part of the lives of people that I was working with, and then going to South Dakota and seeing the same conditions, but with more space, but the same kinds of issues, and that was a big epiphany for me, and wanting to reconnect the questions that they were asking me in Rosebud were the same kinds of questions that people are asking me in Chicago, and questions around, I'd go out there and there was a bunch of us artists, creatives that went out in the early 90s and were invited to come and learn, that there was no food and people didn't have work. And, I'm trying to cook some healthy food and contribute in that way between ceremonies and different festivals and such, and just couldn't find any food. And so our trips out there began to be about bringing food and cooking and then talking about gardening. And I hadn't made the connection yet to my childhood, really, other than I knew how to grow food, and I just assumed everyone knew how to do that, which is not the case, and still is not the case, but more the case than it was, which makes me feel good that we've made some progress. But that, no one knew how to grow food. It just wasn't part of wasn't part of the tradition, and it was something that could be transformative. And so I was asked to bring back agriculture, and it was just such a huge ask. I was like, how am I going to do that? So I talked to my dad, and he had just started visioning around what he was going to do with growing power. And I said, the Lakota have asked us to bring gardening back, so farming back and food systems back. And it was like I'm like, I don't know really how to do that, so I'm gonna just tell you to do it. And literally, I was trying to figure out, like, this image in my mind of these memories of my childhood and that kind of farming and going to the market and finding market, which is still in existence. But when I was growing up, from 8 or 9 on until high school, there are thousands of people who came to that market. And just like trying to understand that from my experience and looking at that in my head, in my memory mind, and looking at South Dakota and how are we going to do this? Like, I really couldn't see it. I couldn't figure it out, but I could see it. And that began the journey, and was literally a invitation, making a connection, and then creating a parallel between different environments and different cultures that have so much in common, and not really like even getting into the history of reservations and displacement and genocide and all of that, just that basic kind of like human need to grow food, and what do we need to do that, like, and realizing that it was such a huge commitment that it would require a lot more work on my part if I was going to actually meet that vision and that request. And that's where it started. And for me, I decided from those experiences to go back to school and become an art therapist, and really an art psychotherapist, and have that training, because I wanted to understand how to better address and respond to trauma as an artist, and then and seeing myself, which I'm just starting to claim after all these years, as a healer, and what in the modality that I do that work, and the I being the we, and how we can do that work together through having some foundational things in place. And so, foundational for me with any civilization is the ability to feed your people, the ability to have self-sustaining economies, and to do so in a manner that's fair and equitable. I mean, it's just like you don't have to be some genius economist to know that. Learning basics to how you stabilize communities. But it's very difficult to do that within the context of the system, which I'm sure everyone who's listening, and you're like a scholar on this. But for me, I have to understand. I'm like, okay, I know how to make things happen. How do I do this? And how do I do this in a way that's not, well, at the time, I wasn't even that I was like, yeah, let's do it, and this, and like, you kind of have to be a little bit like that. I was much younger. But also the idea of like not knowing that you're not supposed to do things, and not knowing, and having a level of freedom of not being bound by the restrictions that we even do to ourselves within our own community. So I was like, I'm going to grow food because people need food. And my understanding of growing food was because I grew up farming. So there's a lot of food. It's not just a little cute couple scraggly greens sticking up, which is all I saw. I go to these spaces where all this funding had been pumped into spaces and big organizations that were primarily white-led and dominated, and there'd be like no food. It's like in the middle of communities that people are starving nutritionally, and we're not growing any food. And so I would say that. And so that was not a popular thing to say. It was the truth. And at the time, this is in the early 2000s, there were very few people of color even in the mix. in the gardening mix or growing mix in Chicago. So that I was encountering. And so it was 9/11 happened, and I realized how fragile I was at that point. I just finished grad school. I was working at a small social service agency and running a FEMA program, emergency like CETA and FEMA services for resources for paying rent and for, emergencies, running a food pantry and a clothing depository. And my goal was to move folks from an emergency scenario to enrichment because I wanted to do art, to make art and do beautiful things and, kind of do that kind of healing modality. But how can you in good conscience, go to the art when people are starving? So like that was just, I got really stuck with that. And then I was like, I got to do this work for a while, like doing my own studio practice or doing, individual or group therapy or family therapy and, being part of an apparatus that isn't really addressing the root cause or creating a pathway isn't going to do it. And my thesis was actually it was an alternative sentencing for juveniles, using that older terminology, in lieu of sentencing. So doing art therapy and therapeutic intervention. So that was my thesis. Because it was called Crossroads, like embedded with all kinds of future unfoldings for me, around creating space for young people to reflect on the very difficult scenarios that they have to contend with and have led to some sort of incarceration or activated that pathway in their lives, short-circuiting that with space to look at that crossroads as an opportunity to make different choices, but having a path for folks to actually go down that road, and that was over and over again. I kept having those, like, how can we do this where people can actually get paid, where they can live in a balanced way, that they have options, especially young people who, had that were telling me, it wasn't just, some observation that I was working with, that didn't have options. That's why they were selling drugs. That's why they're involved in gangs, to survive and because they didn't have options. So it became a responsibility for me to think about and to solve all these problems through tools that are really simple and basic and begin to address all kinds of issues. And that was food. It was like, ta-da, food. And then 9/11, we don't know where any of our food's coming from. All these folks that I'm working with, including myself, I'm watching this, we didn't know what was happening, right? Like literally watching it on in real time on the news. And the immediate thought I had was, I don't know, it was the end of the world. What's going on? And there was nowhere in Chicago for me. This is, I was like, I'm in like worst case scenario, right? Like there'll be no gasoline. I'll be biking or walking. I was calculating, it'll probably take me like a few days. And, I'm like, I was like real quick, this is like, 10, 20 seconds in my brain. But the first thing that really was like, I have to go to my parents because that's the only place I know that I know that there'd be food and shit like it. It was 120 miles away, and it's the craziest thing to know that at that point, I think Chicago had 7 days of food. It's less now, and we've just gone through this almost 18 years cycle. 9/11, 2000, 2001, somewhere in there, of not being that far ahead of being more food secure. But with a lot more folks having a consciousness around food production and the need and the opportunity to build commerce around it. So that's the sort of what activated me to do Growing Power Chicago. And then building a team and understanding that to do the work, you can't do the work. You have to have a balance of team members who are both in it and out of it, to have that push pull. And that's super important. It's part of, I think, it is a really important tension and opportunity to build bridges, but also to help support an apparatus for dismantling and rebuilding simultaneously. Because that we have to do that. We have to figure out how to do that and work with everybody. And so that was important to me. And also just being a multicultural person, knowing that and being in lots of conversations and rooms and hearing things and just knowing that there's issues on all sides. And how can we leverage the strengths and weaknesses and the commitment, the dedication, the passion for folks who really want to transform the community. So this is like 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4 in that zone, exploring, trying to figure it out. And then just beginning to build projects because I couldn't get a site. Funders weren't funding this work. My dad was struggling. He was personally financed Growing Power for years, and definitely towards the end of trying to build a system without capital, without access to conventional capital, having access to alternative capital, and having to problem solve and weave through urban environments that aren't designed for survival, aren't designed for thrival, as now we like to say. But in creating space for food to be grown, like just basic, not even exciting food, just food, any kind of food, and to activate that. And so he did a really good job, and he got me hooked in. Like, I wasn't trying to go back to the farm and work with my dad, but it was part of my cultural reclamation too, because of ancestors, honoring your ancestors and continuing their work, and maintaining those legacies and reconnecting. So all of it was kind of is intertwined. And then just, I think the power of how we've developed in our team and many people some people, it's not for everybody. And definitely the intensity of the way that we have worked historically is really difficult. It is difficult to farm. It is even more difficult to farm in the city. And it's even more difficult to do within the context of everyone telling you that what you're doing doesn't matter. It's not making an impact. Not everyone, meaning not everyone, but folks with a lot of power, and power. And it's still a struggle in Chicago. Around valuing community autonomy and the ability to use our spaces and to transform them, like to be able to take a depleted space that is really the result of intentional or unintentional, but I think more times than not, intentional degradation that impacts our health. Why do we have so much contamination in Black and Brown communities and not as much in white communities or affluent communities, to even take it out of, of a white supremacy, narrative, but just communities that have more assets tend to not have these kinds of health issues, and communities who have less assets have all kinds of challenges. And when you start growing food, you elevate all of that, because it's not just the built environment. It's a living environment. We build soil, we create it. And the limitation in that first cycle, in the first it's really 17 years, 16, 17 years, is trying to figure out how to do this here, to do it in different ways with mostly fee-for-service support. And leveraging and working really hard to try to address all of those core areas. The Iron Street years, which are incredibly important. And Iron Street is in Bridgeport. We were able to build a farm, a dilapidated warehouse on the river in Bridgeport, which, is enough for folks. We don't have enough time tonight to talk about all that history. But to build a full-on farm on concrete, and to show and prove that can be done, and that we could do that. And of course, we had to, not of course, but it's kind of an of course, the owner wanted $14 million for the site. It was just like we were displaced, and it was a classic displacement. And, there was nothing we could really do to we could have fought and tried to stay there, but why? You know, why? And it was hard. It was hard, very difficult to walk away from that because we were also struggling with Milwaukee, um, having having a lot of the funding dry up because there is also something that I think needs to be talked about more when it's a Black or Brown led organization that is starting to look like they're doing well, funding goes away. It's like we can only get a certain amount, and then it's like there's that's enough. Whereas other entities, they can brag and plaster everywhere that they've gotten funding. When we would do it, we would get a lot of criticism, and so it's just an interesting dynamic, and understanding the 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 importance, and I think the work that you've been doing over the years, which I'm been really excited to kind of have it hit a point, a kind of consciousness level where it can really take off around how we have these alternative economies um, within a transitioning space that we're finally at because of 2020. So so I'm excited to enter into this green era, which is the name of the new campus, and it's the first model. Everything is, it's still kind of, it's not as so the whole concept of it, which I can talk about, with probably be better with you asking me questions because there's a lot and I could talk about any aspect of it for hours. But I think that the way that we've structured the different entities to make it happen and to get the financing and to do all the things is not ideal. But the elements of everything that we want to see in a cooperatively owned recirculating economy are there. There will be a lot to study. And when replication begins down the road in a few years, the whole structure can shift into something that is completely community owned, and we were very, very fortunate to be able to work with this last year, I'm still in 2020, so whatever. Like my my year end culturally is in June, so halfway through the cultural year. So I'm really excited about the work that we're doing with Chai Fresh Kitchen. So this is my first experience working with a cooperative, like cooperative owned. So Camille Kerr of Upside Down Consulting popped up into our world with trying to figure out emergency food and the crisis, which is a big part of what UGC did this year, on top of all of our other things. But we really entered into that space because of all the years of growing power. We did market baskets, we did emergency food, we did food distribution in all kinds of ways. But the market basket program was, our team did that program for years here. And so it was pretty like just the bank of knowledge. We were able to pivot pretty quickly, but also at the same time, Green Era was happening and moving really quickly towards closing, which I've never done anything like that before, and don't have that background. And just learning about all the way that finance works is in real time is really pretty devastating. And it makes it really clear when you're in it how difficult it is to build wealth without wealth and within the current system. So being able to, I think one of the things I rely on a lot is within my own self is the ability to, and I think it's just like an artist kind of thing. It's a problem solving piece around being able to take, okay, I have finite resources, or this is a problem I'm trying to solve. How can I reconfigure this to make it work? So you're saying you only have resources of X amount here, and you're using it to do the X, Y, and Z. Can I use that instead to do this? And then these are all the other return on investments I can do with that same pool of money. So it's not going to cost you anything more, but let's move it over here. So I'm good at that. That's still not equitable. That's just problem solving. Right. And so that ability to maneuver things is valuable, and I'm very grateful for it, but it's not ideal and it's not fair. So, but at a certain point, we all, and this is something that, closer to and be more so as a project, develops and is working and financially flowing, we'll be able to do less of that kind of problem solving, and then we can move on to other problems. And I would like one of the problems that is solved is that at least within our community, and we have a fantastic collective of folks working together now, and are passionate about building their farms. Englewood Village Farms and Grow Greater Englewood, and some of the cooperative business work that's already started. The work with Shy Fresh Kitchen, who's now, they're going to be opening up the new space down the street from a bunch of our projects, and so we're all moving in that same trajectory, is incredibly exciting. And the timing of Green Era, of having this campus, 9-acre campus in Auburn Gresham at 83rd and Wallace, within the shadow of Simeon High School, with the Metro line going by, so hundreds of thousands of people see the site as it's developing and wonder what's there, and the new Metro site, the station opening up. So, transportation, that's gonna activate that whole area. And knowing that we're in a position with our partnership with Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation and lots of other stakeholders in that community, and in Englewood, of course, and I always forget the name of the other community right down the way. There's so many stakeholders that with the creation of all the compost that will be produced from this facility. So that was the goal, was the compost. And by the way, when you decompose things, it releases methane, which is a renewable gas. But understanding that cycle and training and teaching our youth and adults and intergenerationally around those natural systems that just happen, those cycles, you have perpetual energy. And so the idea on a small scale of how we've been able to transform lives, and we're just talking about this today, is so profound. And to be able to do this on a industrial scale and just demonstrate that, like, hey, that thing in there is doing what you're doing over here. I'm predicting that the genius that will emerge will be incredibly. I was hoping Kayla would be on. I just saw her question pop up, because I was definitely with us. Kayla was with me. She was actually one of the first people to go out to South Dakota. So I was right, like a year behind my big sister there. But the ability for young people and the community to see those processes, both at the kind of tactile, like I can do this in my backyard, and then on the industrial level, and understand the economies around that. In fact, the facility will producing material that people can use to grow their own food and create their own economy, and that we will be generating revenue, and that part of the company, the way the company is structured, and this is, I would have liked to have done more of this, but just the nature of the current scenario is that there's a chunk of the company that is called the Racial and Social Equity Investors LLC, and it's a placeholder because there's no money being created right now. But the idea that this sort of ownership structure will be a funding mechanism, a financing mechanism to support other entities that I'm looking over in the next few years of developing that board or that council. It's probably more of a council to fund projects, to invest in projects, and to provide that seed capital and reparational capital, even from something that's coming from us. And how do you do repair work without resources, without it becoming something that is very limited, because people still want what they want, And so that's always my dilemma of going too far in one direction or the other, because there's so many people with so many different needs, but I know everybody needs resources. They need food, and they need to be inspired, and they need to be in community, and they need to see things happening within their own environment, right? So back again to South Dakota, back again to like understanding boundaries and what we're told. And we're told a lot of times to stay within, we tell ourselves this, oh, don't go over there, don't go over here. Like, no, why do we do that? So same thing. Why can't we build businesses a certain way? Why can't we have access to capital like other folks do? And I think recent events are really like a really awesome opportunity. I got to frame it. I'm an optimist. Opportunity to look at how do we have a president who is probably the worst businessman that anyone could possibly know. He doesn't have to pay taxes. He's so bad. He makes no money, and yet he continues to get financing. Like, that makes no sense to me. Yet all of us who do this work in Chicago and other places who do meaningful, powerful work on the ground, that is absolutely just the lives saved is irreplaceable, the amount of funds. Even if folks, fail, or, they can't pay, service their financing or whatever it may be, it doesn't really make sense. And as we have more of these larger projects emerge, and large being relative to whatever that means, for us, we needed something big enough that could make enough resources to fund itself and to generate capital as a model that was going to solve, the use of petroleum products, which is, was the number one thing around the ag that my dad figured out, how to create fertility from food waste at a level and a density that you can grow things really close together, that we're still, I'm just so used to it now that I still have to argue with people about it, even though we've proven it over and over again. And that understanding and being able to pass on that understanding is part of what I'm responsible for. That I, as a human being, I feel like I have the responsibility to not only continue that work and that learning myself, but also to talk about it and talk about the journey of like, I never in a million years would have thought that I would be farming or be known for farming. Like, that's just not, as a new human being in the world, that was not part of my thinking. But I do have these like really powerful memories of just being told, like, one day you will be very grateful that you know how to do this. And I'm very grateful. I'm more grateful, I think, to not only know about how to grow things, but how to think and see, and to be able to find different ways to address complex problems and have the persistence to stick with it. And so I try to tell like folks who are like, oh, I want to, folks that we've trained and educated over the years around our systems, like, the way we do it is not the way you're going to do it. There's some things that will really be helpful to know so that you can avoid some problems. So you may want to think about it like this, because after 3 or 4 seasons, that's 3 or 4 seasons of trying to experiment with something, when you could just do it like this and learn some other things. So just the idea of us having these finite amounts of time for our lives, and what can we do within our time? What can we do that will leave an impression and give the next generation, which I look at as every 7 years, the support that they and the inspiration and the space to be able to take, to continue that work, to learn, to build on what's there, and to innovate for the next generation, and to be able to reconnect those cycles. And that intergenerational piece is also what we've integrated into the whole Green Era campus. And to be able to, for folks to be able to come and see that and feel it and be part of it. And then to build these economies, like, what does it look like to have, a time bank? What does that look like? How do we do that? How do we do that in a way that people, there's accountability, and that folks want to live in community in that way. And that we have the resources where we can, like my sister in Englewood, buy the block, and to create these spaces where we're able to not just flip real estate, but that we're actually grounding ourselves and building wealth because we're rooted in the community, and then we have the resources to have stable housing, and that it's super affordable, and that we're able to not work in ways that that require exploitation. Like, who wants to go back and have to fix problems or have your children or grandchildren do it because of exploitive business practices. So that's probably longer than what you wanted me to talk about, but you did ask your question the way you asked it. So you
Uh,
got that response. I was trying to weave in a whole lot of things, um, about me and why, and just who I am, but the journey, and like, it's so, I hope that listeners think about their own lives and their ancestors and the struggles that that just, I don't care what the person's background is, just to be alive. I mean, it's just a miracle. And then all of the challenges and all the pitfalls to disrupt the manifestation of an individual, family, or community's vision, and what can we collectively do to disrupt that cycle so people can see themselves within their own vision, that they can follow their dreams and not just have to be repressed or um, marginalized to the degree where we give up hope. You know, um, so that's all those are all the things I think about when I'm growing food and trying to make it pretty, which is really important to us, because the healing, when people come into the farm, and it was harder to do when it was more of a business, which is why we wanted to shift into this idea of pathways to freedom and using the dipping gourd and the North Star and that passage of helping folks through our own example and through the spaces that we're creating to be free. And what does that look like? Can we do that together? And all of us think about it, just has come up so many times for our whole team. Just thinking of, like, why do some people want to like shift and other people just want to not shift? And just Harriet Tubman, like, it probably broke her heart every time where people wouldn't want to leave, and how, but also the courage that it takes to stay. And there's like a certain courage to stay, because for whatever reason, and family was probably usually the reason. And um and then to leave, and and she was able to navigate through. And so how can we, through our work, create this pathway that's illuminated so people can see themselves in it? So people come to the farm and the spaces and they're like, oh, I want to grow some food. Oh, this is beautiful. I feel so much better, which is all we heard this summer with the limited people who could come on site because of COVID. And but it was pretty profound and super gratifying to see that all these years of kind of work and trying to keep things together and create space where people can, oh, look what they're doing, oh, I want to do that, all of that, like that kind of, like, very traditional competitive kind of stuff, where it's like, well, they're doing that now, let me go ahead, let me find out what's going on. And like understanding that psychology and being able to utilize that to empower and encourage and inspire our community to take more and more of this on. So I believe that is happening. I think we're there, and we have to do more of it. And I feel very lucky and privileged to be able to contribute this to Chicago, and to do it in community, and to work with folks who do amazing things every day. So that's what I got to say.
that was stellar. This broadcast is nothing if not one grounded in curiosity, and so you can never predict, how a question will land and how a question will, send someone off. But my practice is grounded in listening, so I appreciate, even if the tangent goes, to as far as the tangent will go is necessary, right? And as I talked to the guest in December, Miliaku, the tangent is where a lot of learning is. So I appreciate that. Um, And there were lots of gems in there, so I'm looking forward to minding the broadcast for all of the gems. One of the last ones there was about that aspect that you talked about of sort of leaving and staying. And one of the elements of the freedom farmers that we've come across, just I mean, with the story of Fannie Lou Hamer, the practice of Freedom Farm Cooperative was about the fact that people were just leaving. They were migrating north because they were like, I don't feel good here. And the practice of developing freedom farmers was about, look, no, you can stay, you can have a life here, we can have a life here. And I'm also reminded of the work of a dear friend who passed. I called him a dear friend, even though we only got acquainted, really near the end of their life. But Elandria, and really in the Stay Project, about LGBTQ youth, having a place in Appalachia, and just not needing to kind of migrate out of there because of the, feelings of oppression. So maybe you can link that into this notion that you dropped in, the sort of, your ideas around cultural reclamation. How does sort of the cultural reclamation relate to the land work that you feel yourself doing? And perhaps it's also connected to that healing aspect of healing that rift that is the migration pathway. So
Yeah, I mean, the earth is a living being, I mean, it literally, it's just something that you can't really, the idea of land ownership or just even the land, I like to use, this is like everyone keeps saying the land. So now I'm like, it's part of my lexicon a little bit. I always have called it the earth, and I'll call it space. So that's just how my brain works. I mean, I mean, it's the environment, the space that you're working in is 100% is your partner in anything you do, whether it's a paved piece of parking lot that you're able to take, like transform into a verdant space to grow food, or if it's, publicly owned land, which I've been really interested in. Well, for one, it's the comment, it's our land, it's all of our land. But to be able to emphasize that and to utilize it because it's our land, and so just even that, like being able to say, why can't we use this space, these green spaces to grow food? People are starving, and having no one be able to give me a good reason why we couldn't. That's how I started. It was literally that. And then it grew. And so you can't do this healing work without having a relationship to the earth and understanding that this kind of work. I think that as Black people, as brown people, as indigenous people who have indigenous understanding of their cultural background, and that includes Europeans, that includes folks globally. I'm not going to go list all types of people, but you know what I'm saying. That's our spirituality. It's like, it's that relationship with nature. It's however you understand God, it's how it manifests typically, and so to not take in a higher power when you're doing recovery work. And I do think that being survivors of trauma, which all of us are, all of our family lines are, it's in our DNA, that trauma that has totally been really, because everyone's just generations just trying to survive, it hasn't been addressed. So when we're on the land and we're able to reconnect ourselves to the land, whether we're growing yellow squash, I think yellow squash, because I made it for dinner for my son's, one of my son's favorite vegetables. Yellow squash with onions and stewed is like a Black Southern dish that I grew up with my mom making it, because it was something that was part of both of my cultures. And we grew, and like having that connection is incredibly healing, especially when we're the descendants of folks who were displaced from their land because of terror. So if you're as a clinician, as a therapist, especially as an art therapist, being able to work within the modality that has caused the pain, that is how the capitalism became so horrible, which is based on slavery and exploitation of labor, you have to go to the root, and the root is in the ground. So you can't disconnect it. But I think having that understanding of how to work with the earth and those traditions, those mystery schools, that's why I went to South Dakota. That's why I was called to do that. But it's also because I used to lay between, I used to make pillows out of the earth and like take naps and hang out when I was left out in fields to fill up bushels of green beans and stuff. Because my dad would just leave us out there and be like, come back to the house until you fill up all these bushels. Like he went to his job. So, I take naps and I have this relationship with the earth that I think even those memories as my timeline, developed, that I was like, I don't quite remember why, but there's something incredibly healing here beyond the food, the transaction of growing food and us eating it and composting it. I mean, that's the whole mysterious cycle that is powerful. But just even that, like understanding that our trauma, this soil is soaked with our ancestors' blood, and that it hasn't been addressed. In Chicago, used to have farms everywhere, so this is not something new. But the idea of displacing people because of I don't even know what to call it anymore. It's just because of pure evil. I don't know. I can't. It's hard to understand. Why people lynch, why people would do those things, is such a foreign thing that it requires healing. And so we just haven't done it. And so that is, I think, why a lot of us are called to do this work, why people find it really healing, and why we wanted to pause before getting back into sort of the economy of farming without having space to do that grieving and healing and reconnection, because it's something that the ancestors require, that we need to be able to work with toddlers and to reconnect them literally to the earth, to pick up worms, to sort of have that tactile experience is so important, so that we're able to see ourselves within our environment on the ground that we stand on. And if we don't feel like we belong, it's really difficult to internalize that as you're growing up, just in the different, developmental stages. So that's why. And it's, and it's simply as simple as saying, on a casual, well, it's good for you. It's like we keep it light because it is very deep and it's very complex. And being able to be in a space where we're not having to prove that it's important or, fight for resources just to exist, to be in a space where we can really dig into that, to hold circles, for folks to nourish one another, for folks to build their businesses, and who want to serve and sell produce or distribute produce, depending on their business model in our communities, is incredibly important and super traditional. And everything that my dear friend Monica wrote about, and in her lineage, and the kind of continuation of the civil rights movement, this is the work that we've all continued to do. We just have called it different things because it's Chicago.
You have to come up with a name, or
I love it. It's the best city because it's so complex.
Yes,
and is so complex, and it's just so real, and it reflects the world, So
yes, and you have to come up with a new name for the practice every 10 years, otherwise the funders don't think you're innovating. So
yeah, I'm done with that. I think we were in a different stage too with philanthropy, where philanthropy is moving less away from that. We're going to tell you what we want to support, and more into a collaboration, because it doesn't really make sense to do it without that.
yes,
Because all the, you have resource. I mean, we're all gonna at some point, we do that already, right? We're supporting one another's work, and that you can't really have racial or social equity without equitable relationships with funders and folks who are, have more power than we do. We have to repair those things, and not and I think it's super important. It's super important. It's hard though.
yes. So I have a question just around, and just brief questions, just to kind of close us out. But there's this question around sort of, the values that an institution has scaled up become sort of what could potentially be the values that societies have. So we talk about sort of these values within the sort of solidarity economy framework of solidarity, cooperation, mutualism, participatory democracy, equity, sustainability, pluralism. Those are what they are. But I'm wondering what sort of values you see in the sort of institutions that you are developing. Maybe you're kind of still considering them organizations. I don't know. There's an institutional question there. But the values you see in the organizations you are working in that comprise your work, and how they might fit in this earth-based economy.
I mean, I think uh, values of, you know, longevity, of being able to longevity in the context of folks being rooted and grounded in the work that they're doing, so that there's mastery of growing technique. I mean, that's super important. You can't do that without having land, having it be permanently um, protected to do that, and owned by the community, or owned by whoever is um, cultivating it. um, it's hard for me um, to respond to that in a really kind of simple way, because I mean, we have a mission statement and values, and we have a theory of change, and it's all aligned, and it shows up in our work. I mean, I think for me, it's always this constant constant kind of tension between manifesting the actual institution of the farm or of the food system, and also meeting folks where they're at around their needs, the real needs to live in Chicago. It's expensive. We got to figure out economically how to do that. How do you pay for your rent or your mortgage and do this work? And so that is, I think, in to do it without exploiting people. We're overworking people, or having folks do too many things, and so they burn out, and then they leave, and then everything has to start over again, and then all of that knowledge is lost. So I think one of the values is just a real kind of holding up of knowledge transfer, of fair wages, beyond fair wages, but like real kind of trajectory where people can see, like, this is a baseline, but we're working to get here together. And which is sort of a combination of, I think, some of the cooperative values that I've seen manifest, and like actually manifest beyond theory, is trying to figure that out. And so that's why I'm excited to work with co-ops that are figuring it out, so that we can transition, and the we being a multitude of entities, into that kind of into that kind of structure. I have to see how something can manifest to be able to understand how to replicate it, right? So, and as somebody, and as a part of different circles and different tables and different collaboratives, um, it all looks different. Nothing's consistent. So, which is part of transformation, and so, transformation, change, the ability to pivot, the ability to be patient, the ability to support, and also uh, support and model what it should look like, but not how it needs to look like. It shouldn't be the same everywhere. But this is how we do it. So do it like this or not do it like this. But you got something now to respond to. And so, and it not be just here's a cute little performance. No, I'm out of here. But we're gonna really work on this, and from that, and perfect it. Like I'm not a perfectionist, but there's stuff that is just drives me nuts that we haven't achieved yet. And even though it's totally unrealistic to even think that it could happen already, but it's part of that drive, right? So I don't know if you'd call that a value, but collectively, if there's enough people who see it and value it, then it manifests. And I think that is it takes a lot of patience and a lot of negotiations to get to that point. And I think we're all about to do that. Like it feels very much once we're able to freely mix without fear of dying, which is, not funny, but I mean, but it is kind of, that is the reality. It's going to be really powerful. I think that folks are going to really want to and really value living in community, being able to support each other differently, and to really be, to really exemplify who we are culturally as people, along with how, and because of that, how we're going to run businesses, how we're going to create the business of this next stage, and not just, treading water, which is, it's felt like that for way too long. Great work, awesome, collectively for everybody, amazing work, but we've just been treading water. We've just been like, okay, we got to hit land soon. We got to hit land. And if I feel like we can, how when you're in water and it's like, like you can kind of touch the bottom, but you're still, it feels like that, like we're really close. And that's exciting to me.
So, just grounding in the close, then, what would you like to leave folks with in terms of, your sort of conclusions about how you would like to kind of, close this space, this conversation today, but also how would you like people to engage with the work of Urban Growers Collective and Green Era, as we kind of send them off?
I mean, we have programs, we have workshops, we have space for people to come grow food. We have space for people who want to go into farming. We have Fresh Moves mobile market, ways people can get emergency food and to purchase food. Sliding scale, that's probably our most like, that I'm super proud of, our ability to have sort of like maintain that program and figured it out, and are at a point where it's been really powerful to have the produce from our farms, the farmers for Chicago, the beginning farmers, to be able to supply produce to sell in our most vulnerable communities that have the least amount of nutritional food access. Like that, just to support that, just to combine, buy a bunch of Malcolm's collard greens, or, some oyster mushrooms that we've grown, or Your Bountiful Harvests, like beautiful, these black cherry tomatoes that we sold, and or Sisters in the Village, Chow Chow, like those kinds of things, or Cha Cha, depending on what part of the South you're from. Like those are great ways. Coming out and volunteering. We had limited volunteer time, but our volunteer time isn't regular volunteer time. It's like you can be recurring, and we're trying to do more. Is this kind of up your alley? Like more of a like work share, but like just we're easing our way into thinking about how do we. There's folks who want to come and contribute their time and energy, and how can that be monetized in some different ways? So I think we're at a point where there's people who are interested in that, and it's not the work that we directly do, but we're a collective, so we create space for folks to bring that knowledge in, because there's people are coming together to do that work. And so there's that, and then the herbalism, which has been, a lifelong kind of journey. We have we grow a lot of medicinal herbs, like medicinal plants, and we're learning more from our community. There's a lot of herbalists in Chicago and in Milwaukee, and doctors who do healing, food as medicine work, and folks are showing up, and we're growing all these medicinal plants. I just made salves yesterday. My salves from all my I just one that's the 2020 blend that is powerful, and so being able to and for me to do that with the knowledge that I've accumulated, and is everyone's stuff is a little different. So you get different medicines from different people. So just that, just being able to share that, those are things I'm not gonna you know, go sell a bunch of, but I'll probably that's valuable. I'll trade that with somebody, and I know it has something. It has me in it. It has part of my ashe in it. So, to be able to know that we all have medicines for and from each other, and to create a space, these environments that can contain that and create this bubble, that bubble can expand and become a more and more peaceful and verdant space. The birds were crazy this year. I jump around a lot, sorry, but I do. The birds, there were so many birds that it's like, why are there so many birds this year? And it's like, oh, because the world has changed, and it was a little chill out. These birds are happy as a clam because there's less, craziness going on. There's more nature. It's been able to recover a little bit. But it was also such a compliment to know that we're growing so much that the word is out. I mean, they line up waiting for everyone to leave so they can come feast, and the hawks showed up and the eagles have showed up. All good compliments, really powerful compliments from nature that the healing work has started, and it's digging in, and it's a collective thing. It's not just me or UGC, it's everybody. It's all the farmers, it's the youth, it's their families. It's, folks coming to volunteer. It's folks coming to work for workshops. It's the neighborhood. It's folks embracing and seeing the space and themselves in the space in a different way. So that's, website. People can go sign up for a plot, come in, take a workshop. All our stuff is sliding scale. So there's we charge a fee. That's, if you got it, please pay it. If not, whatever you can afford. I mean, and that is, that's, we want to build more of that, because if I have more, I want to share what I have, and to build that ethos back into how we survived in the South. South Fannie Lou knew. I mean, that's just I'm just that's how you do. We have power when we're all together and supporting one another. So yeah. So looking forward to the growing season, but also really enjoying this time to have these kinds of conversations. Although I've been talking too much, but that's what happens with nighttime
Yes.
stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot, and and it should be. It should be a lot because of the gravitas and the responsibility of working in the earth. We're not supposed to just do any old thing. So I feel really good about being part of that restoration work. And I feel really good about nurturing a community of used to be young people, now are adults who understand that, and we're called to do that work as well. So I just hope that we can support more of that, and and seed more of this collectively with our partners and folks who just want to, just need uh, a encouragement, because it's hard. It's hard work, and no one entity or one person or one entity or one individual should think that they have to do it all, but that we do it together. And that's hard. It's hard to remember that way of being. So it's definitely encouraging to see more of that happening.
Absolutely. And I will certainly echo, your appreciation of the birds. I grew some callaloo in my backyard, last season. And, I just went ahead and let it just kind of go to stalk. And, it was interesting to see the birds popping in here in January, just nipping at the little seeds that they could find on there. So I appreciate it. Oh, okay, I contributed to the circle. All right. So yes, I was grounded in that as well. And we've got the links in the comment section, so folks, drop into urbangrowerscollective.org, greenerachicago.com. So you did tell folks how to engage with Urban Growers Collective. Is the Green Era more of just kind of wait and see? Is it developments there that folks might want to plug in or just be cognizant of?
greenerachicago.com.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And uh, I would say the Chicago Food Policy Action Council as well, because I'm one of the co-founders and the board president and sort of our policy wing of work for many of our kind of collective partners. But all good. And USAN, which you of course are part of too. Also a really important and powerful space for all of us to work together and to support each other's efforts as Black and Brown and BIPOC folks.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've got all three of those links in the comment section for folks to check out. I appreciate the opportunity to check into this story today, and thank you for the generosity with giving me 20 minutes over the scheduled time just so that we could dig into just a few questions. We'll probably have to catch up on a part two and see how we can dig past that backstory once I've gone ahead and mined all the gems out of it. Certainly, there was a gem in there personally around a sibling of mine who did tell me a story, as when I was in my teenage years, came to me, he said, Mikey, yeah, I mean, I don't want to sell, and by sell, but I don't feel like I have a choice. I don't feel like I have options.
Yeah.
At the time he was, having to go to a probation office, and that was in Kenner, which, going to Gretna was, maybe an hour drive, So yeah, I mean, he was just having to take 2-3 hours out of a day, and not work, for 2 days a week to go see a probation officer. So I mean, all challenges that we are trying to address in a new vision of an economy that we are building, and certainly I appreciate the work of restoration that is happening at Urban Growers Collective and within Green Era. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. This is great, and yeah, definitely. I'm a rambler, so I am, and it's gotten pretty intense this year too. So, which is good. This is a time of my life when I'm supposed to be rambly, but it can be a little bit circular, and but that's part of it is circular. So it's just a matter of trying to respond and tell a narrative that is complex and changes depending on who you're talking to, right? So, and I think I started off with this idea of the facets,
Yes.
and depending on where you're standing, it may look a certain way, but if you shift over here, it looks completely different. And so that's a concept that I've really been embracing, and I encourage everybody who is listening to think about that. Like, it's just a really good. It's hard when you're moving quickly and having to rapid fire make decisions and you know um, to do it, but it is really helpful, and I think it is part of our reclamation of conflict resolution is just to understand the perspective. And but to a point, there's within our community, I think it is something that it's an art that is not lost. It just needs to be reactivated and for folks to be reminded of that capacity. I'm like thinking of DC. Like, I keep seeing it in my mind's eye and like try not to talk about it, but like those folks, I don't know what to do with that. That's not my work. So other than to be like, so let's focus on our stuff, because that's what we've been talking about for a few hundred years. This is the issue. And and to be able to have a dialogue within our own community where we have to undo that harm, because it's in our hearts and it's affected our ability to see ourselves as whole people, and that connection to the earth is part of who we are. And so yeah, so it's gonna be a long road, but it's gonna be fun. So, and the call I had before my this conversation was for a community planning meeting for a new farm garden, but like more of an enabling garden for folks that have mobility issues, so medical issues. In Woodlawn, it's going to be 60th and King, and then we're also working. We're part of Englewood Village Farms, and so we'll be activating the space at 58th and Halstead this kind of simultaneously. So they're sister gardens, which is such an interesting pre parallel, like within a couple blocks. But that highway separates those two communities, right? It's all split. But and there's two different wards and, all that kind of fun Chicago stuff. But there's a relationship between those gardens and the Merrill Garden and all the gardens in Woodlawn, and how we have more and more of these spaces where we can come together and grow food and be in community, and not be displaced because of it. that is that's the one of the first lessons I learned as an artist is wherever there's a bunch of artists and creatives that live somewhere, it gonna become we have a couple parties, have a little festival or something, stuff we do. Suddenly we can't live it no more. I learned that early on. And I was like, okay, well, how do I stop this from happening? Because why do I got to keep moving? And that idea of ownership and the ability to build wealth because of stability is so key. And so I'm looking forward to this next decade of being able to resolve that issue. We're gonna do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel very confident that we have the problem solvers we need. And so I appreciate you for being, one of those problem solvers and, in struggle around these ideas, around these challenges, around the big, hairy, the BHAGs, big, hairy, problems. So, yes, thank you very much for dropping into the broadcast. And yeah, part two is coming.
You're welcome and thank you.
All right. Have a good evening. All right, folks. We are at that conclusion point for this episode of the Ujamaa Hour. Um, yeah, this has been a strong, expansive conversation. Definitely went around a few different terrains. So it was great. I'm looking forward to kind of pulling down the audio and really kind of untangling some of the ideas that are present in there, and that will be present on the podcast at some point in the future. So make sure that you look out for that. Thank you for dropping into the broadcast this evening. The one piece that I had, sort of a conclusion point, I just finished reading this text by Dean Spade, Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During Crisis. And I would encourage folks to, pick up a copy, just to kind of, dig into, if you don't have the sort of full context for this mutual aid moment that is, COVID-19, that is the George Floyd uprisings around police violence, that is, all of the things that we endured throughout the course of 2020. This is a good sort of nugget, very small text, just over 100 pages. But in the back, there's a specific piece around healing that I want folks to dig into, which is around the mind maps, which echo back to the Icarus Project. And just an opportunity for folks to take a moment while you are centered and begin developing a support map that helps people around you better support you if you are in a difficult time. So I'm encouraging folks, to get with their crew, get with their pods, get with their, community or whomever they sort of their chosen family, and, think about the mad maps, right? Think about the mad maps so that you can figure out how, when you are challenged, to have a map that helps people to know how to support you through your challenges. That's the closing thought that I'll have for the moment. We are certainly, well over our time. But we will be back here for the next broadcast in February, and I do want to kind of give you just a preview of that schedule. So in February, we've got Caitlin Johnson of the Black Roots Alliance. We've got Martine Carvel coming from Ujamaa Medics in March. In April, Latier Pifus, Womanist Working Collective. May, Dominique Duval Diop, Liz Drame and Laura Porterfield of Duroot Consulting. June, Brandon Durham, Feed the People Shy. July, Taryn Randall, Getting Grown Collective. Open slot for August. If you know somebody who should be on this broadcast, you should probably recommend them. But we are waiting for some responses on that August date. September, Hafid Hakwe of People's Hub. So if you were at the Worker Cooperative convening here in Chicago, People's Hub was the tech support on that. We'll be able to talk to Hafid about some of the work that's happening there. And then October, November, and December still open. If you if you have recommendations for folks who should be on the Ujamaa Hour, you can send them over, and we'll make sure that we get them in a broadcast. Until then, until we come back to you in February with Caitlin Johnson, look forward to catching up with you. Otherwise, check out Co-op for Lib, check out the Coldernut Collaborative Facebook page. Follow some of the things that are happening there. And until then, peace.